Well, today on the Cryptid Quest Podcast, I have the honor of introducing and interviewing Mr. Daniel Perez, the publisher and editor of Bigfoot Times magazine. And he just came out with a new book that I'm super excited about. I've actually ordered it and it's on its way. So let's welcome Daniel. How you doing today, Daniel?
I'm doing just fine. I'm here on the West Coast in California.
There you go. So how's the weather out there right now?
Today is actually a very good day. The past few days we've had a lot of rain, but it's something that we need here in Southern California.
Oh, 100%, 100%. So, what really got you into the subject of Bigfoot in the first place?
Well, in 1973, I was about 10 years old, and my parents dropped us off at a walk-in movie, my older brother and older sister and myself. Uh, and we thought it was going to be like a monster movie, Godzilla, that sort of thing. Instead, the movie was called The Legend of Boggy Creek. And so I'm watching that movie, and it's about these hairy man-like creatures in Arkansas, in Fouke specifically, and they called it the Fouke monster, not Bigfoot. Never once is Bigfoot mentioned in the movie, but that movie hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't believe that the narrator in the movie was suggesting that these things could be real and that what was happening there was for real. And so, like I said, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And the next thing I did is I had a library card, and so I jogged on over to the library to see what this was all about. And that may have been, oh, I don't know, months later, maybe a year later. And I kind of connected that the Fouke monster must be like a Bigfoot type of thing. And so at the library, they hooked me up with the books about the subject. And back in the early 70s, there wasn't a whole lot of literature on the subject. It was few and far between. And so that's where I got hooked, and I'm still hooked. And I find it fascinating to this very day.
So, something you said there kind of struck a chord with me because, but it was the Patty film that originally got me. And I instantly had to go out and start finding books and info on it. But you've recently written a book that's called Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, Pictorial Discussion.
That's
And
correct.
something you did that was kind of cool that I've noticed, I've heard you talk about it, is one thing is the price, and that has to do with the frames in the film. And then the super limited edition came with something special, and you had a certain amount of those, and that also has to do with the frames in the film. And you get a little sample of sand or the dirt from Bluff Creek in it as well, from what I hear.
That's absolutely correct. So let's go back to the price. The
All right.
130-page book, and this is printed on book gloss paper, which is the really shiny white paper. It's not cheap paper by any stretch. So that's part of why the price is what it is. But the price of the book is $39.54. And if you stop for a minute and just look at the last three digits, 954, that is the number of frames in the Patterson-Gimlin film. So for those people who are nerdy about the film, that's a treat for those people. 954, the number of frames. And then if we jump back to what you were talking about as well, 352, that is perhaps the most reproduced frame for the public to see, and where it's looking back, it's the most reproduced frame in for books, magazines, for television, etc. And so we made 352 copies of the book, super limited edition. And I challenge you right now, there's no book in Bigfooting history around the world that has literally has the dirt in it. This one does.
That's crazy. That's so cool.
You have a small soil sample from the Patterson-Gimlin film site, in addition to my signature in it, in addition to a Bigfoot stamp, in addition to the number of super limited edition copy that you get. So I own number 1, number 2, I believe was sold off on eBay. By chance, it just happened to be a Bigfoot Times subscriber who got it. And so that was part of the rules, is that you had to be a member of the Bigfoot Times to get the super limited edition. And so, such as you will get a super limited edition because you do get the newsletter. And I think you kind of found out, or you may have known about me in September of 2023 when we first met, I believe, in Missouri. And so, like I said, the 352 copies go to members only. And the rest of the people who are just want a copy of the book can get it on their own, but it's not going to be a super limited edition.
All right.
In terms of value for what you're getting, and I told people in the newsletter, I said, consider this thing as an investment. 3 copies of the book have sold on eBay. I put 3 copies on eBay and 3 of them sold. One of them sold for $2.99. And I'm not talking $2.99, $299, and
Wow.
2 of them for over $100. So immediately, I mean, this is a brand new book, and the price has already just jumped up quite a bit. And so this is one of those books that will absolutely hold its value. And it sounds self-serving, but it's true, is that this book, as the readers have indicated who have copies of the book, is an instant Bigfoot classic.
Heck yeah.
Among the essential books that you're going to want to have in your library.
Oh yeah.
So if you don't mind, I'm going to show a copy of the book right now.
Oh no, go right ahead.
This is the book right here.
Very, very cool.
And as you could see, there's puzzle pieces here putting Patty back together, the creature in the film. And so the Patterson-Gimlin film, as we all know, is a puzzle, and it's slowly being put back together.
Correct.
That's the beauty of the cover.
Yeah, that is a really cool cover, and I love your concepts that you ran with. That just so cool.
And this for the readers who are not unaware of me, this is a copy of the newsletter, the Bigfoot Times.
I got mine too.
And this is an ink on paper newsletter that is mailed out in the postal mail, and this has been going on for 28 years.
Wow.
This is the only every other Bigfoot newsletter that was published that was on paper and mailed to a membership since the dawn of the internet and since the dawn of social media, all of those publications went extinct, and I just kept going. And so here we are today.
Well, we're left with the best. That's all I can say. And anybody out there that doesn't get it, I'd say you've got to get it, man. It's got all the latest, newest, greatest info on the subject that you could ask for. I mean, it really does. So, you originally had written, it was a 23-page booklet called Bigfoot at Bluff Creek. And yes.
This is that publication. And on the first go around in 1994, it was 1,000 copies that we printed, and it did not have a bibliography in the back of the booklet. And then in 2003, I republished the booklet, 4,000 copies, and it did have a bibliography. But since that time, all 5,000 copies have been sold out. Some of them you could find on eBay, I think, but I'm not certain. But it has become an extremely rare, and the more anything becomes rare, naturally the price goes up. So all I can say to the people out there in podcast universe is that good luck in finding one.
There you go. So, and is this what you basically? I'm taking that was the basis for the book you just put out. But you have,
Yeah,
I was going to say, but you have a lot more pictures and a lot more new info in the new book.
yeah. I told the readers of the Bigfoot Times newsletter, because the Bigfoot Times newsletter is my social media,
Yeah.
not so much Facebook or social media in general. But I told the readers that you could kind of think of Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, a pictorial discussion, uh, as Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, the original booklet, uh, the same thing but on steroids.
I got you.
So it is ramped up incredibly, and it's profusely illustrated with color images, color photos that have never seen daylight before. And the format of the book is 8.5 times 11. And so there are photos that span all 2 pages. So they're some of the biggest imagery that you could find in any Bigfoot book, past or present.
So, what made you want to put out this new book?
Because I had all this information that wasn't really out there. And I said, well, I'm 61 and eventually I will die like everyone else. And I want to share it with this generation of Bigfooters, this generation of the public, and after I'm gone, another generation, because obviously the book will be reprinted.
Yeah. So, and I know that you know all the biggest, most iconic names out there in the Bigfoot world. Um, and I think you have pretty much the largest archive of information and stories and everything about the subject than bigger than anyone else, as I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. First of all, my physical files are probably the largest in the world, and I've yet to see anyone who would challenge me on that point. And second, my personal Bigfoot library, and we're talking books and talking autograph books as well, is also, to the best of my knowledge, the largest ever. And I haven't seen anyone challenge me on that point as well. I have some of the early Bigfoot books that you simply cannot get a hold of today.
So, and then I've also heard you talk about a lot of these pictures had come from, there were more people that ended up at the site after the film was shot. Um, One of the most intriguing things I heard you talk about, and I can't remember all the details in my head, but they found a possible nest site and then some smaller prints. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's funny. You don't even have a copy of the book, and you're already privy to that information. So obviously, word of mouth does get out.
Yes.
I will tell you about that. Is that the people that were up there, timber management assistants on behalf of the United States Forest Service, was Lyle Laverty and about 4 or 5 other guys, and they were responsible for selecting which trees that were going to be cut down in that area, specifically the Bluff Creek area where the film was shot. And so one day prior to the footage, they had found a nest up on Scorpion Creek, up near the road. And Lyle, in an interview with me in 2017, and I think this was July 5th of 2017, Lyle Laverty, in a phone interview with me, told me something to the effect that it was the damnedest thing I've ever seen because it didn't look like anything we've ever seen. And so he's not here. He's a guy in timber management assistant. He's not a Bigfooter, so he's not connecting the dots. But later, almost 60 years later, this editor of the Bigfoot Times newsletter is. And so he may have seen the bedding area of where Patty was staying. He may have stepped literally into
Wow.
her bedroom without even knowing it. And And they always say hindsight is 2020. Just imagine if you could go back to that day when he saw it and said, like, let's look for hairs.
Yeah.
And then the other instance where you mentioned the small footprints is that in June 23rd of 1968, a group of people went back to the film site, and that was with John Green and another famous Bigfooter, famous but not known to the Bigfoot community, was also with him by the name of George Haas. And so he's close to the Bluff Creek area, the creek itself, and he had found some small human-like footprints. And so he had mentioned this to Jim McLaren, and Jim McLaren kind of brushed it off, and he says, well, those are not Bigfoot. Those are just small prints of a person. So the second question is, or the question that you would ask is, what is a small juvenile person walking here on Bluff Creek to begin with, because it's a very remote area? And two, why is he not wearing shoes? And so who knows? This is strictly speculation, but who knows? Maybe that might have been the offspring of Patty, and this specific area was their playground, home.
Well, yeah, and there's been a lot of speculation that Patty had a young one. And there's even certain people that say they see one in the film footage. I'm not so sure about that, but do you think maybe possibly these prints might have fueled that, or is this something that was found out much later?
In June of '68, after the film, those small tracks were seen. So that may be an indication that this was Patty's offspring, but that's a long stretch. That's a big stretch to make, but still, I wish there's no photos of those tracks that exist that I know of, because if anything, George would have taken slides of them, and for whatever reason, he did not, that I'm aware of. And so I guess he was told by Jim McLaren that those are just small people tracks, disregard. And so possibly George Haas did disregard, because you have to remember back in that day that when you had film, either slide film or print film, that you had to have it developed. So today we could take 1,000 pictures of our cat. It doesn't cost us a dime.
Yeah.
But 1,000 pictures of your cat back in 1968, that would cost you a small fortune to have those developed.
Yeah. So, and another thing, you brought up the film. There's been a lot of back and forth on like the film speed or the lens size that they used. How much of a difference would that really make? Do you know?
Well, it doesn't necessarily make a difference to someone reading a book, but for those people who are trying to do like a forensic dissection of the film, the lens on the camera, which is interchangeable, what we determined, and this is discussed in the book, was likely a 20 millimeter frame. So if you could look at this rectangle that you and I see each other with, and you place the camera, say, back here, say at maybe, for instance, let's just call this 2 feet right here to my finger. And then when the lens goes out, it'll capture on the right side and the left side, it'll go to certain points. And what we did is that we looked at the actual frames of the film, and this was, I believe, in 2021, and we kept moving the camera with the 20 millimeter lens until the right edge lined up and the left edge lined up exactly to what we were seeing in the PG film in a frame, a full frame where you could see everything. And we determined that the 20 millimeter lens was the best fit. But here's the problem with that. And I accept that information, because that's by experimentation. But back in the day, in the 60s, the Kodak K100 16 millimeter movie camera, which Roger Patterson had with him, was the default lens was the 25 millimeter lens. And it actually says so on the box. And I have a copy of the camera here. And so Roger, when he rented the camera, it's very unlikely to me that he would have specified a certain lens. So in other words, if you go to a rental yard for whatever, you're normally going to get that camera with the 25 millimeter lens. And later down the line, when I was writing Bigfoot at Bluff Creek in 1994, but I started the writing process earlier, Rene DeHinden was still living. And he told me point blank that the camera was equipped with a 25 millimeter lens. And what I failed to do back in my younger day, I failed to ask him, well, how do you know this information? You know, someone can tell me, yeah, I'm wearing a certain type of hat, but then say, for instance, that person never had a job. I failed to ask them, well, like, where did you get the money to buy that hat?
Yeah. That's awesome.
The hat. And so with that, it's just like, and then getting back to the lens again in general, is the lens and the distance to the subject with using cinematography formulas, you could determine the height of the subject, knowing the focal length of the lens and the distance to the subject. And so this year, later in October, I'm going back to work on that question, and I've invited some volunteers to go with me so we could have volunteers in the field to do the work. And just what's deceptive about the film site is everyone sees on YouTube the film, and they can run it at slow motion, fast motion, whatever the case may be. But what most people don't understand is how big that film site is. You could put a football field in that film site.
Holy cow!
From the creek to where the mountain starts to go up, and then from the opposite way, from where she starts to where she ends up, and the camera runs out of film. It's that big. So in other words, you can't, if you were there doing experiments on your own, it would take you forever plus a day to get from one point to the other, because it's big, very big.
Yeah. So, and I know I've also heard you talk about the, what's it called, the IM index, and they compare each, what is it? Each primate, you can take measurements. I don't know the calculations, how they come up with it, but like humans have a certain number, apes have a certain number, and so on and so forth. And Patty from the film comes very close to what Lucy was.
Well, obviously, word of mouth has gotten out there. There's no doubt that this book is like obviously the most discussed Bigfoot book.
Definitely.
In recent memory, because this is one of the things that I did in the book, because early on, I forget who it was that noticed the IM index. I guess people were investigators and researchers were looking at the film and noticing that the arms appeared to be a little bit longer than what you see on a person. And so hence the IM intermembral index. That's basically the proportion of the length of our arms compared to the length of our legs. And so this is in Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, my latest book, A Pictorial Discussion. So I'm going to read to you the IM index of some things that you might be aware of. So you and I, our IM index is 70. And so a gorilla is 117. And so when we go to the zoo and look at gorillas, we notice that, hey, these guys seem to have arms that are quite a bit longer than us.
Yeah.
It's true. And then the chimpanzees have an IM index of 106. And again, 70 and 106 is quite a bit of a difference. Patty has an IM index between 85 and 90. And so the Patterson-Gimlin film was shot in 67. So in the early 70s, hominid in East Africa was discovered by Richard Leakey and Louis Leakey and his group. And when they were playing Lucy in the Sky, when they were doing the excavation in this area, they were blasting music, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I guess that's the Beatles song. And so when they found her, they just assumed because she was so small, the fossil bones, the fossils, that they said, hey, let's just name her Lucy because that's what we're listening to. So that's how the name stuck. But Lucy's IM index is 84.6. For all intents and purposes, you could round it up to 85. And so she mimics or matches Patty's IM index.
Wow.
And so you stop right there, and then you have to question, for those, the skeptics and the doubters, you have to ask them this question. If they were right in front of us, you would say, you mean to tell me that a broke cowboy from Yakima, Washington, Roger Patterson, was so far ahead of his time that he even had the IM index of Patty at 85 to 90, so it would match a hominid that would be discovered in the future? That's stretching it beyond belief.
Really, but there's so many. Go ahead.
But that is a very important point that is brought up in the book, and this is the first time ever that the connection between Lucy and Patty is made, and that connection has been made by a union licensed electrician, which you're looking at right now.
Yeah.
So everyone thinks that just because you're in the construction field that you don't know anything about anything else. Well, I'm here to tell you that's wrong.
Yeah. Well, speaking to a carpenter, but you deal with a lot more dangerous stuff than I do.
Yeah.
So, and I know they also tried to recreate the tracks. Some of the people, I don't remember the names. They even tried piggybacking or something, I heard, to try and get the depth, and they never could.
So on November 5th of 1967, just a few weeks after the film was shot, is Richard Henry from Willow Creek, who's now deceased. As far as I know, I'm the only Bigfooter that has met him on multiple occasions. I think I met him 3 or 4 times. Is that we went back there to look at the film site and for him to give me testimony about what he observed, because he was there November 5th of 67 and actually saw the footprints on the film site. And so he was there with another guy by the name of Bob Barnett, who's now deceased, and Jim McLaren, who's still living. But they went there to see what they could find. And they noticed that Jim and Richard in particular said that these tracks were in that sandbar very deep, and that when they walked on the sandbar adjacent to the tracks, that they were coming nowhere near what the tracks were left in that sandbar. And so they obviously made a determination, like anyone else would, is that whatever made those tracks was extremely heavy. And so they figured that, well, I think they were each weighing less than 200 pounds at the time. They figured that if we piggybacked each one another and jumped on the other person and tried to leave tracks, then we could match what we see with the tracks that Patty left behind. But again, they did not achieve that goal. So again, whatever was there was obviously quite a bit more than 400 pounds.
Yeah.
Probably when you start to look at Patty and start to understand that her standing height or walking height was about 7'3" and she was probably closer to 700 pounds in weight, because you're only seeing one side of her, and later you're seeing the back of her. But also too, you know, the bigger you are, the wider you are in general, in proportion. So she may have been almost 3 feet, a little over 3 feet at the shoulders. And so to account for what you see on the film, that's a lot of weight.
Yeah, it is.
And you're just not going to do that with a costume.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, no one has been able to demonstrate that even with a man at 7'3" tall, and there's a few of those out there, no one has been able to demonstrate that, oh, you could put a costume on that person and mimic what is seen on the film. That hasn't been done, and that suggests to me that the reason why they haven't done that because they will fail miserably at that effort.
Yeah, so that's a lot of strikes against was it Bob Hieronymus who said he was in the suit? Just a lot of things don't add up to where that seems plausible.
Well, let me tell you about Bob Hieronymus for a minute. For openers, I met Bob Hieronymus in May of 2009 when they had the Yakima Bigfoot Roundup in Yakima. So I was up in Yakima once again. I think I've been there 3 times. And I knocked on his door, and I'm 5'7" tall. And so I know he's an older man, and I know when people get older, they tend to shrink. But he was nowhere near 6 feet tall. I would say at best, maybe 5'10" tall.
Yeah.
So number one, he would not be able to play effectively Patty as a role as he claims he did back in the day in '67. You can't say that he shrunk from 7'3" tall down to 5'10" tall from '67 to 2009. I just don't buy that.
Yeah.
And number two is that with Bob Hieronymus claims that he was shorted $1,000 back in '67, that he claimed that Roger Patterson was going to give him to do this. And shortly after, the film was all over the newspapers and just all over the place in men's magazines. And so obviously, unless you got your head in a ditch, Bob Hieronymus would have known that and would have demanded his money, $1,000. And so back then, you could have probably taken maybe $5,000 or less than that and purchased a house in Yakima, Washington. So $1,000 back then was a big deal. And so he doesn't really come out with his admission till the late 1990s when he was shopping his story to the tabloids. So there again, there's a problem with the Bob Hieronymus testimony. Number two is that Bob claims he was down there with Roger and Bob, but when all of these people were seen down there by other people, such as Al Hodgson, Al Hodgson's wife, Syl McCoy, these people are passed on. They never mention that they saw a third party, Bob Hieronymus. So you can't even physically place them at the crime scene at the time in question, but you can place Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson because we have, prior to the footage of them on the horseback.
Yeah.
So we know for a fact that they were there at the place that they said they were at the time in question.
Yeah. So, and one of the things that I guess over the years I've always kind of believed in the video, but one of the things that definitely got me over the edge to where I'm 100% sure that that's a Bigfoot in the picture is it when it swings around and looks, or when she does, and it's a she has breasts. And wouldn't make any sense to me to make, if you're gonna fake something, why would you even think about making a female Bigfoot? That makes no sense to me.
Again, back in the day, if you were to just have a discussion about, and as you know, the book is a discussion, part of the title, but if you were just back in '67, if you were just to have a simple discussion about monster movies that you see on TV or went to the matinee to go look at the theater, is all of the monsters at the time, gorilla monsters, were all universally man, in the image of man, not the image of a female.
Yeah.
And so what you see on the film is female. So again, you would, if we could bring Roger Patterson back to life, ask him, well, if you faked it, why did you make it a female?
Yeah.
It just, all of these little things are so ridiculous.
Yeah.
That to think that Oh yeah, he was thinking that it had to be a female to make it more convincing. And it's just like that just strains the imagination and it's nonsense. And so in general though, say for instance Roger knew that he was going to go film a Bigfoot, if you were to take like back up way back and say you were God and you had a vision of all this thing going down moments before it happened, in general, in species, he had a 50-50 chance of filming a female or a male. And it just happened to be that he got tails and it happened to be a female. So he could have had a male or a female. It just happened to be that what he filmed was a female.
Yeah.
And it has enormous breasts that
Yeah.
are plainly visible,
Oh yeah. Plainly visible.
that are plainly hair covered. And so an objection that was raised at the time is that by people who saw the film, they said something to the effect that gorillas do not have hair on their breasts. And that was one of the objections. But that actually is not a strong argument because what you see on the film has hair. And for that specific environment, which gets very, very cold and snowy in the wintertime, you would you would need to have hair on your breast to keep them warm. And so that's what you see. I mean, nature and evolution, it adapts as time goes on, and so it takes care of things that are still living, that are challenging the environment.
So, are there any other pieces of evidence out there or footage or anything else that you think holds as much weight as this film?
I tend to think that the Freeman film, Paul Freeman, from August 20th of 1992 from Deduck Springs, and I think this is on the Washington side of the border between Oregon and Washington, might very well be real. And so now that I've learned more about it, he may have shot a legitimate film. I think the footage that was shot by Stacy Brown Jr. and Stacy Brown Sr. in Florida with using a thermal imager is the real deal. The footage, well, not footage, but digital images shot by Randy Chase up on Silver Star Mountain, Washington State. I think this was November of 2005. I think that's the real deal. And he was out on a hike and snapped some photos that you could probably see on just Googling it out on the internet are likely real. So yeah. And one thing that I wanted to bring to the attention of you and everyone else is that everyone is under the assumption that the PG film was the first film ever of a Bigfoot. But in my book, Bigfoot at Bluff Creek, a pictorial discussion, because the vast amount of research I did, is that is not so. The first footage was shot in Alaska in an area called Mountain View, and that was in the 40s. But here's the thing. In the 40s, Alaska was not a state in the United States. So it's the footage that was shot in Alaska in the 40s is the first one in North America. But the first film in the United States was probably Roger Patterson's from '67 that has any claim to fame.
Wow.
But so we discussed that in this book as well. So there's all sorts of gold nuggets that if you read that no one has ever known about prior to my book, because when I say I'm a Bigfoot researcher, I mean that 100%.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So, have you had any experiences yourself on any of this?
Well,
I mean,
in 1979, 1980, I keep getting the dates wrong, in Hemet, California, myself and Doug Trapp went out to an area to go visit Dick and June Putnam. And back in the day, there were only landlines. And if it was what they call a cordless phone, it was still a landline.
Yeah.
And so Hemet is kind of halfway in between San Diego and Los Angeles. And they were reporting Bigfoot activity, not just tracks, but I think their sons or one of their sons may have had a sighting. And so we decided that we would just, instead of calling them, we would just go out there on a Saturday or a Sunday on the weekend to go see what was happening. And so they were pretty poor, and they lived out in Hemet at the time was just a town, and they lived still out in the woods or out away from the city area or the town area. And we knocked on their door and they weren't home. And so we thought to ourselves, well, now what? And I said, well, Doug, we're here. And it just rained quite a bit prior to our arrival. And we said, well, why don't we just go look around, kind of look around out in the hills out here, because that area was just hilly. Not a whole lot of trees. There were some trees, but not a whole lot. And so during that process, we went to an area where there was a creek, and this creek was created by the rain runoff. It wasn't a normal creek. It was the rain was causing this creek to be there. And so we went to this area, and about the same time, Doug and I looked down, and lo and behold, see, we didn't even know we were going to be there. We were just fumbling around, if you will.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, we looked down, and there were tracks.
Oh, wow.
And the tracks were mostly destroyed from the rain, but one of them, you could see this almost perfect heel print. And I did take some photos, a massive heel print. And so Doug had some plaster of Paris in his trunk, but the plaster of Paris he had was already moist. And so when we tried to make a casting, it just crumbled. And so we did make the attempt to make a casting, but it crumbled. I took some photos, and it was the first time that I had seen footprints. 79, 80, I was about 17, 18 years old, right in that area. And so that was my first exposure to what you would call physical evidence in the ground. And so that kind of fired me up even more, because all of a sudden, you're not just reading about the subject, you're actually seeing physical evidence in the ground. And so it just kind of pushed me on.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I do my podcast, I do on a lot of different subjects. So I wanted to ask you, do you think there's any other cryptids out there that might have an actual shot at being real besides Bigfoot?
Well, let's just talk about Bigfoot in general. Is that based on what people are seeing in North America from Alaska to Florida, and I don't know that distance if you were to shoot a straight line from one point to the other, but there may be, and Lauren Coleman has suggested this, that there may be a subspecies of a Bigfoot. You know, when you see other species that bears, they come in varieties, the polar bear, the brown bear, the black bear, the grizzly bear. And so there might be, or would not surprise me that we would have subspecies of Bigfoot or of that nature. But in cryptozoology in general, I'm pretty convinced that the Loch Ness Monster is out there. I'm
Really?
pretty that Ogopogo is out there.
Yeah.
I'm pretty convinced that these marine animals that people are seeing are out there. And in fact, you could see on YouTube a couple was out fishing or just having a good time in the waters off of Florida when they got that footage of this thing that seems to wrap itself around a manatee or something like that and kills it. And this happens very fast. And I guess they said that thing was bigger than a telephone pole or something like that. And so that, to them, they did not recognize that as a normal species. So there's likely quite a few marine animals that are out there that we are unaware of, because as much as we'd like to think that we've explored the oceans and the waters of the world, it probably is not so.
No, I think, what do they say? It's like 95% is still like unexplored in the
Yeah.
ocean. So Lord only knows what's out there.
And then if you talk about Bigfoot-like creatures, I suspect there's quite a few of them scattered around the world, because you have reports of this coming from like Russia, from the Himalayas, from Australia, and parts in between. And it's a real head scratcher, because it's just like, you have to ask yourself, why don't we have any physical evidence to support any of this? And I'm talking about a body. And that just hasn't happened yet. And I follow track and field sort of religiously. And for the longest time, everyone thought that no man could ever run under 4 minutes for the mile. Now we have high school kids running under 4 minutes for the mile. And so once you break that barrier, then other people know that it's possible. And so I suspect once they get the first one, we will start to realize that the Yeti in the Himalayas is out there too, and that we need to go after it in a very serious way. The Yowie from Australia is out there, and we need to go after it. It'll open the floodgates as to what is out there.
So, and there's one around here. I hear people talk about Gugway, I think is how you pronounce it. It's supposed to have like a baboon type face, and it makes me wonder sometimes if people are confusing different types of Bigfoot for, like, when they say they see a dog man or something. You know, I don't know what category to put that thing in, but I wonder sometimes if maybe they're just mistaking them for a different type of Bigfoot. Because like you said, there's different types of humans, different body types, face, skin. So, you know, I think there's a possibility of that, but
all the Dogman reports, I'm no expert at Dogman, but I would suspect that these people are likely seeing a Bigfoot, because I have yet to see, and I've mentioned this before, I have yet to see anything about Dogman in terms of prints or in terms of photos that are convincing to me. So I suspect that maybe what they've seen is a Bigfoot, or maybe Dogman in general is something that they've made up. But with that, back, I guess, in the early 90s, we heard a lot about the chupacabras, and that may be very, very real. And we have yet to catch up with that species, if it is out there. And so we're not certain exactly what it is, but you don't really hear about that many reports, as far as I know, in 2025. And if you were go to south of Australia, I think that island is called Hobart or Tasmania. And then you've got the Tasmania devil there. We knew that this species existed at one time. It's kind of like a striped marsupial, like leopard type of. I'm no expert on that. But
are you talking about the Tasmanian tiger?
The Tasmanian tiger. So as far as we know, it did go extinct, but there are people living on the island there that claim that they have sightings. So I suspect that that's probably out there too, because in general, people don't just make up things. I mean, they do and they don't, but in this case, I suspect that they're actually witnessing this thing. And I think if someone were to go out there and get one, a physical body, that would resolve that question, that the Tasmanian tiger is out there as well.
Yeah.
Anyone who's taken a plane ride from, say, New York to Los Angeles, and they're up in the air at 30,000 feet looking down at the United States, you realize just how bloody big the area is, and that when you start to see the cities, even the big cities, they just encompass a really small part, and everything else is just, there's nothing out there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of open places out there, and there's a lot of possibilities for these creatures to be out there.
Yeah. So I'm gonna then start wrapping it up now. But before we go, do you have any plans for like another book, or you got something in the works?
Well, two things. I'm 61 now. Two things that I want to do is I want to write a book, Bigfoot in North America, just a general book to discuss certain cases and to have more of a discussion about Bigfoot in general, not so much about Patty, the creature from 1967. And then also later this year, if I have time, I'm working on I guess it's a 50 plus page book just on bibliography of primary sources that are related to the Patterson-Gimlin film. So rather than add those to the back of my book, which would have made the price quite a bit more, I'm going to make it a separate entity for those people who want to do their own research, all this bibliographical information about the primary sources from television, magazines, journals, books that had to do with the PG film.
Okay.
So
Very
that's
cool.
what I'm working on.
So, all right. Well, why don't you let everybody know where they can sign up for your magazine and where they can get the book at?
Simply go to BigfootTimes.net, spelled BIGFOOTTIMES.net. And you could get my latest book, and you could also get a subscription to the Bigfoot Times newsletter. And we've been around for 28 years, so we're not going to take your money and run.
No, biggest and the best, man. I love my issue every month. I think it's about time for me to re-up too. But I need to check my envelope, make sure. But
Yeah.
well, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on with me today, Daniel. This was very, very interesting, educating, and I had a lot of fun talking to you. Thanks for coming on today.
I'm simply delighted, and like I said, it was the earlier the better, because
Heck yeah.
when you do things early in the morning, your mind is really fresh.
Heck
And
yeah.
so this was best for us.
It worked out great as far as I'm concerned. All right, everybody. I'm going to thank my guest one more time, Daniel Perez, and everybody in Cryptid Land, keep it creepy. Oh.
Yeah, out in the woods where the shadows creep, I'm trying to find a legend that the people keep. Bigfoot's the name, got a story to tell. Footprints in the mud, can't you hear the bell? Whispers in the night, can you feel that chill? Bigfoot on the run, he's a legend, keep it real. Bigfoot, yeah, he's the talk of the town. Creeping through the trees, never wearing a frown. Legend of the forest, he's got a big stride. As the trap beats thump, you know he's got pride. Like I'm on a quest, searching for the homie, you know he's the best. Got my camera ready, heightened senses on blast. Snap a shot of Sasquatch, legend unsurpassed. Eyes in the dark, you can't catch what you can't see. King of the woods, living wild and free. Bigfoot, yeah, he's the talk of the town. Creeping through the trees, never wearing a frown. Legend of the forest, he's got a big stride. As the trap beats thump, you know he's got pride.